Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Greg Sizemore, and I am the leader of the Premier Associations Group. And yes, in case you're wondering, I'm also Nathaniel's dad. And on behalf of Nathaniel, we welcome you to this virtual book launch of Deadly Division. And we're going to talk a little bit about that book and what it's about in the genre, etc. And we're also very honored to have two additional guests with us. Three additional guests with us, actually, that we want to introduce to you at this time. First of all is Rick Robinson. Rick, if you can wave there, that would be terrific. He is an award-winning author of a dozen books, ranging from political thrillers to literary fiction, and his latest is on fly fishing, and it's entitled "A Fish Ate My Homework." So we'll be eager to read that book, Rick, when it comes out. Rick, thank you for joining us. Rick's also an attorney. Formerly practiced his entire career with, well, not his entire career, but most lately with a group called Great Ned and Ritchie here in Cincinnati, very highly esteemed attorney. Next, we have Jim Head. Jim's a graduate of the University of Maryland, the George Washington University Law School, and Georgetown Law School. He is a partner with Williams Mullen in Greater DC, where he concentrates on estate planning and business succession. However, his passion and his avocation is, frankly, 10 years of exhaustive research and hundreds of interviews into the life of Chandler Christie and Christie's legacy to his life. Jim is currently completing a work on Reaching the Summit. It's the last volume in something called An Affair with Beauty trilogy, and it's expected to also debut. He's also a terrific friend and mentor of Nathaniel's. Jim, we welcome you. And last but not least is our buddy Brent Darnell. Brent is a playwright, an author, and a dramatist guild member. He's also the pioneer of bringing emotional intelligence to the construction industry. And he's taught people skills to the technical world, engineers, etc., in 100 different companies in 20 different countries. He's also an adjunct professor at Auburn, at Penn State, Virginia Tech, and he's been a multiple guest lecturer of mine on emotional intelligence. So we're glad that you're here. If you have a question at all that you'd like to ask any of these fine authors, we would ask you to put that in the chat box, and we'll be monitoring those as we go here throughout the evening. And anybody who does ask a question in the chat box, you're going to be entered for a drawing for a free copy of Nathaniel's book, which, as you all know, discloses today. So I want to introduce Nathaniel. Nathaniel, how do you want to be introduced? Do you want to be introduced with Sizemore and Company, with PRG and me, or the world's newest New York Times bestselling author? How do you want to proceed?
Let's keep the focus on the good stuff.
Okay,
and,
good.
Yeah, so I guess I would describe myself as an author, attorney, and entrepreneur, however you want to put those in order. And there's a pretty cool story that I'm eager to share behind how this got written. And a lot of folks, I was just talking to my publicist this morning, and the feedback that she's gotten is that hopefully a lot of folks will be inspired to, in her words, just go for it, which is how she describes me and pursuing my hobby and passion for writing, as I'm sure Rick, Brent, and Jim have done as well. So thank you for the introduction, and excited to share the experience with the world.
Great. I want to introduce Rick Robinson again. And Rick, I want to turn things over to you. Tell us a little bit about your experiences and what being an author of all of these books has done for you. What was your compelling passion that caused you to begin to move from the practice of law to writing? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Help us know you better, Rick.
Well, when I was 17 years old, I was going to Ludlow High School, and I was given the opportunity to spend an afternoon with the great Jesse Stewart. Jesse Stewart who is a Pulitzer Prize winning novelist for books like Hide of the Hunter, Taps for Private Tootsie, The Thread That Runs So True, just this brilliant author who wrote about coming of age in the mountains. And I got to spend the day with the old man. and it was absolutely one of the most enjoyable afternoons. And at 17 years old, I was convinced that I was going to write the great coming of age novel. Now, there ended up being one problem. I was 17 years old, and there was no coming of age at 17 years old in Ludlow, Kentucky. What I found for the next 30 years was there still was no coming of age for me. And I kept trying to write this book, trying to write this book, trying to write this book. And that's what my kids always joke about is, Dad tried to write a coming of age novel, and, he couldn't get past the second chapter. But what I ended up doing, I was actually at a ball game with one of my clients from Gradenhead, as you mentioned, Greg. One of my clients from there, still in the area, still a banker, Tom Salinger, and we had gone to opening day, and he said to me, "Why are you?" I told him the story that I just told you, and he said, "Well, why are you trying to write that? You've got 30 years in politics." At that point, 30 years of politics to tell you how long I'd been playing around in it. And he said, "Why don't you write you're always telling those stories about being involved in campaigns. You ought to write a political thriller." And it was one of those things that, 30 days later, I had 120 pages. 3 months later, I had a completed novel, and I had 3 different publishers wanting to look at it. Now, when I wrote this, I never thought that there would be a second one. I never thought that anybody would want it to begin with. I was going to pay a client of mine that I had down in Dayton that was a bookbinder. I was going to pay him money to just bind 100 copies and make my friends suffer through it as their Christmas present that next year. My wife ends up reading the book and gives me the ultimate wife compliment. She said, "This isn't half bad." And one thing led to another. We ended up getting a publisher with it. That was a dozen books ago. I did eventually publish. I did end up figuring out the coming of age novel, and figuring out on the basis of my kids getting older.
Interesting.
And the idea of the difference between what success meant to our generation versus their generation versus what our parents might have thought. And so that book, Alligator Alley, is still my favorite. But so I've just wandered in and out of these different books throughout there, come up with a set of characters that were on the political series, and I've just continued to write, continue to throw them out there, occasionally doing political humor books and columns. Not everybody thinks they're funny. As I tell everybody, only 51% of any story thinks they're funny. The other 49% of the people really don't like the other half of the story. But yeah, doing a little bit of it all along the way and having fun with it. And you're right. I'll finish with my next book. Was just sent to the printer this week, and it goes about with my other passion. My brother-in-law, my publisher calls me one day, trying to find me. And she couldn't find me. Finally, a day or two later, I get back with her and she says, "Where the heck have you been?" And I said, "I've been out fly fishing." And she said, "I've always wanted here in West Virginia, I've always wanted to be able to promote a book on fly fishing. Why don't you write a book on fly fishing?" And so I said, "Well, I'm not really that good at it, but my brother-in-law is. So between the two of us, we, again, just published and just sent to the printer this week. With the publisher, a new book called "A Fish Ate My Homework: A Beginner's Guide to Fly Fishing." That should be out hopefully in time for people buying rods and reels come Christmas time.
Great timing. So I know that you've coached and given some input to Nathaniel over the course of his experience writing this book, which was not only a bucket list item, but a pandemic project. What do you think the most important bit of advice for an aspiring author is? What's the hardest thing to do in order to get started?
And the thing that I told Nathaniel when he did this, and everybody, I give a lot of advice. I give a lot to people that come to me and talk about this. But when you get to the point when you're in writing mode, you have to treat it as a job.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say, oh, I'm just going to dabble here, I'm going to dabble there, I'm going to do this. Suddenly 3 years later, you're ended up like Douglas Kinney, the great National Lampoon editor, who, you know, spent a year and a half just piddling around in a novel, and it was his partner ended up throwing it out the window because it was such trash. You know, you have to
Yeah.
sit down, you have to dedicate yourself to writing every night. And as I tell some people, sometimes you spend the entire evening rearranging a paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other nights when at 3 in the morning, my wife Linda is coming down the stairs behind me and going, you know, you need to go to bed sometime soon. So, you know, you just but you have to do it every day. You have to treat it like a job. You have to say, for at least an hour a day, I'm going to do this. And sometimes that hour is an hour, and sometimes that hour takes you way into the evenings.
Sure. It's great advice. By the way, if you're just joining us, welcome. We're glad to have you with us for this virtual book launch of Nathaniel's first book, Deadly Division. Also, you'd be interested to know he's also already at the publisher's request working on his second book. If you have any questions for our guests, and we've just heard a little bit from Rick Robinson, one of Nathaniel's coaches, if you will, or mentors in the book writing journey, who is also an attorney and an accomplished author. If you have any questions, just type them into the chat. And anybody who does have a question in the chat, will be entered in the drawing for a free signed copy. I want to move to Jim Head now for just a moment. Jim, you're also an attorney practicing wills and estates in one of the hottest parts of the country, obviously, the Washington, D.C. area. You are also a mentor and a friend, a coach, and a confidant for Nathaniel in this project. Tell us how you got involved and interested in Howard Chandler Christie.
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you, Nathaniel, for having me. As Greg mentioned, I'm an attorney by day and author by night, and I became interested in the legendary portrait painter Howard Chandler Christie, who was also an Ohio native, as I am from Cincinnati, but he was from the east side of Ohio. And I became interested in him back in 1988 when I was a freshman at the University of Maryland studying economics, and I was up one evening late in the library, and I came across a folio of drawings by Charles Dana Gibson, who created the Gibson Girl. And he was the most famous illustrator in the 1890s. Everyone had heard of the Gibson Girl. Women wanted to be her, and men wanted to marry her. And with pen and ink, he could turn paper into flesh. So this really interested me in illustration. And then I happened to venture upon his friend, Howard Chandler Christie, who was also a contemporary of Gibson. And I discovered him in a book called America's Greatest Illustrators. In that book, there are 10 illustrators, including Gibson and the great Norman Rockwell. But the story that interested me the most was actually none of them. It was about a once blind illustrator who became a portrait painter. Till his dying day, was known as the Barefoot Boy of the Blue Muskingum. And he painted famous people, perhaps the most famous people of the time period, senators and congressmen, presidents from Teddy Roosevelt all the way through Truman, movie stars, living legends like Amelia Earhart and Eddie Rickenbacker, and of course, Douglas MacArthur. And I thought, this is a story I would love to write about. No one had written a book about him, yet there are thousands of newspaper articles about Christie and his wife, Nancy. And so I began in earnest writing about his life in 2006 and finished the first book called, the series is called An Affair with Beauty. It's a trilogy, and the first book is called The Magic of Youth, and the second book is called Romantic Illusions. And as Greg mentioned, I'm working on the third book called Reaching the Summit.
So the question I have for you, Jim, and what I've noticed a commonality between your and Rick's experience is that the curiosity began at a rather young age. Rick at 17, you arguably 18 as a freshman at the University of Maryland. And so obviously you're advanced in your careers, both of you, mid-career, Rick, late career. How did you keep those fires burning, Jim? What was it about the journey that took you all the way to being a published author about the man you were so curious about? And by the way, a piece of that artwork I saw not too long ago in the governor's mansion in Ohio. It hangs on the staircase between the first and second floor, the state and in the private residence, and I immediately thought of you, and what a beautiful piece of work it is.
And that particular work that you saw is of Christie's favorite model, Elise Ford, and her daughter, Holly. And it's titled The Summit, which provides the title for my third book, Reaching the Summit. But when I was in college, I was enamored with Christie and his friends, Charles Dana Gibson and James Montgomery Flagg, who gave us the I Want You Uncle Sam poster, one of the most famous posters ever created. And I thought, what a great story this would be to bring Christie back, and also all of his friends, because they all knew each other. They dined together, they drank together, they put on skits and plays together, they lambasted each other and write each other Christmas cards. And when they all died, they always showed up at each other's funerals. But when I was thinking about this back in the 1980s, the internet wasn't around. In fact, Christie's papers weren't even around. They were in a root cellar in Wayne Township, Pennsylvania, and eventually they made their way to Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania in 2000, and they're still there today. And it was in 2006 I ventured to Lafayette College and spent a week in the special collections researching his life, going through photos and scrapbooks. And I thought, not only is this a great story, it's one of the greatest stories ever ventured upon. Here is a rags to riches epic of an ordinary man, because that's how Christie perceived of himself, but living in remarkable times and possessing an extraordinary talent, the power to seize beauty and immortalize youth. He had fame, he had fortune, and beautiful models, but in the end, he discovered something much greater than all those. People say, what could be greater than fame, fortune, and beautiful models? Well, you have to read the book to find out. That is what propelled me on.
Of course
That
we do.
was good.
Of course we
That was
do.
good.
That propelled me to go further. And as I interviewed some of his models, he had 800 female models. There were only a few left, just a small smattering. And they all said the same thing. Of all the men they ever met, Howard Chandler Christie was one of the greatest men. And I thought, well, I've got to write this not only for myself, but for them, because they thought of him as being so great. And he was. I mean, when you think about all the famous people that he met, he inspired Christian leaders as well too. And I thought, I've got to write about this amazing artist.
Thank you for that. We want to move to Brent Darnell. Again, what we're doing here is introducing three of Nathaniel's mentors and coaches, advisors, if you will, who have a little bit of their thumbprint on deadly division. And we're going to get to Nathaniel in just a second. And thank you for joining us. If you just joined us, and you have a question for any of these three accomplished authors, four, frankly, then place them in the chat room, and we'd love to hear from you. Brent Darnell and I go back several years, and we have engaged him many times at the Construction Users Roundtable, one of my businesses, which caters to the construction and engineering industry. And of course, Brent's specialty is bringing the emotional intelligence component to very technically oriented people. And in the process, he's written these books. Not only is Brent an engineer himself, working for the worldwide firm of Skanska. Many of you have heard of Skanska. But interestingly enough, he's also been a playwright and an author, and has had areas of interest in those disciplines as well. Brent, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, I was thinking, I remember third grade. I remember writing a lot of poetry and writing stories and writing plays. And that just kept going through even middle school, high school. I got to Georgia Tech. I'm studying mechanical engineering. I sent a poem into Atlanta magazine, and they bought it. I sold a poem first quarter freshman year at Georgia Tech, and I had to make this decision. I thought, should I just try to focus on my writing, or should I just go ahead and get through engineering school? Well, the payment for the poem was $25. So now that was in $1977. So, you know.
$100.
I think that's what they're still paying for it.
That's probably what they're still paying for it. Is right, Rick. Absolutely.
Right. So, of course, I finished engineering school and became an engineer and kept working in the construction business. And then had this idea for a book. I had traveled all over the world with Skanska, and had this sort of report about my travels and best practices worldwide about construction and engineering and design. And I thought this would be a pretty good book. So that was the impetus of my first book, The People Profit Connection. And the subtitle was How Emotional Intelligence Can Transform the Construction Industry, basically. And the journey for that, the publishing of that was arduous. And I decided, I had publishers that wanted it, but I didn't like any of the deals, and decided to self-publish, and which led to ultimately all the issues with that ultimately led to me just starting my own publishing company. And that's another story, but yeah, and I've always loved writing. I mean, I've had dozens of plays produced all over the country, and I love that medium. I love short stories. I love poetry. I love, and all of my books that have been published have been nonfiction books. So I still have to write my great American novel. I haven't done that yet, but it's on the list.
That's why God made Paris in the summer. So
right.
if you haven't got anything to do next summer, I think it's calling your name.
All right.
Thank you, Brent. So what we're doing, if you're just joining us, we're introducing you to three of the people who have influenced Nathaniel during his journey toward publication of Deadly Division. And we thank them so much, Rick and Jim and Brent, for being on here. I'm getting several of the private messages, Nathaniel, that people want to know where to go buy the book. Please tell us where to go buy the book, and we want to hear about you and your journey. I'm reading some private messages, so the sender will not be disclosed, but I'm going to Hail Mary pass down to you. Tell us a little bit about how we get a hold of this thing, and tell us a little bit about your journey to Deadly Division. First of all, how to get a hold of it. Do we have a slide or anything on that?
We can even keep it more simple than that. It's my website, my author website. So it can be purchased at Amazon, or it can be purchased at www.nathaniel-sizemore.com. That's www.nathaniel-sizemore.com. And if you go directly to the website, it's fewer clicks than if you were to search it on Amazon.
So tell us a little bit, Nathaniel, about number one, how these three accomplished authors who are just ahead of you on the journey, how they've influenced you, and what their greatest value was to you. And then tell us about the journey to Deadly Division.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So the journey started, the cool part of the story, as I've been told, is that it really started 10 years ago. I was on vacation with you and my family in Kiowa Island, South Carolina. And I had this idea for a book, and I stayed up late. I remember I fired my laptop up and I just started writing, and it was probably 10 pages of aimless drivel. It was inartful, it was clunky, but I really just had this creative idea that I needed to put down on paper so I could go to sleep. And over the next several months, I developed the idea and wrote a basic storyboard, and then started writing. And to Rick's sage advice, I treated it more as a hobby at the time than as a part-time job. And so I wrote about 25 or 30 pages of it. And then it started to collect dust on my bookshelf. And we had a little thing called COVID that hit globally a couple of years ago. And I just had this, I'll call it this internal dialogue that prompted me to finish the book. It was a clear, finish the book. Now's the time. You can't go to the zoo. You can't take your kids to Chuck E. Cheese. Now's your time to finish the book. And so I began to be more.
What? You mean we couldn't take the Grand Sugars to Chuck E. Cheese? You're killing me.
No, trust us. Everybody was in the house for several months. I think everybody remembers.
We could ask Aaron how that worked out, but we won't. Keep going.
A lot of Downton Abbey, a lot of Netflix.
Yes.
So that's when I really got deliberate with it. And I said, okay, I'm gonna devote about an hour and a half, 2 hours a night, every night until I get it done. And about 40 days later, I had a very, very, very rough manuscript. And I had a couple folks who I said, hey, I wrote this manuscript. Would you be interested in it's clunky. Would you be interested in taking a look? So this is a shout out to my 3 beta readers, Dustin Moon, Meg Matthews, and Miss Angela Castleman. You guys were the first to review it. You offered some fantastic feedback. And then when the feedback was positive, when they said, we really enjoyed this story, this could really be something cool. That's when I sought the sage advice of my 3 mentors here on the board. Jim was a former boss of mine at Williams Mullen, and we have some good in the trenches story, Jim, of course. And don't worry, none of the characters are written based on you. So.
The names have been changed to protect the ones that didn't do it, Jim.
And Rick Robinson, I knew by reputation, and I knew that he was a prominent lawyer and political figure in Northern Kentucky. And
by the way, let me interject if I might. Rick, you were a colleague and a key staff advisor of the late great Senator Jim Bunning. Am I correct, Rick?
Yes, I was. And if you read some of the first books, one thing you'll find is you'll see a little bit of Jim Bunning in some of the characters.
I'm sure Jim was a terrific senator, highly regarded. I think he was on the banking committee, if I'm not mistaken. I may be mistaken on that.
On the House when he was in the House when I worked for him.
Yes,
we worked on
that's what I thought.
Committee.
So very influential congressman and senator, and we appreciate your service to making Jim the man that he was. Nathaniel, back to you on that regarding Rick's comments and his coaching for you.
Yeah, so I had to track Rick down. Rick is on the retirement side. He's a hard man to get a hold of, but I finally tracked down his email. You can thank Bill Geisen for that one, by the way, Rick. I thank Bill Geisen. And so I said, Rick, I don't know how to do this. I think I'm going in the general direction. Can you help me? And he offered some great advice. And then I got to Mr. Brent Darnell. So again, I had known Brent from some of my work in the construction industry. A highly reputable figure there. And I knew he had written some books, started talking to him and found out about BDI Publishers based out of Atlanta. And when I learned about it, one of the big lessons after writing the book, that's when the fun really starts, is evaluating the publishing options. And there are basically 3. You can go with a literary agent if you can get them to call you back, and go with a big publishing house. But as Brent may have alluded to, the deal isn't great for unknown or first-time authors. And I really didn't like the idea that they would take creative control from me. Yeah. Door number 2 was the self-publishing route, but I looked into how much time that would take, and I knew that I didn't probably have that time. And then I went with door number 3, which was with Brent, with a smaller, mid-sized publishing company, where he let me keep my creative control, and the rest, as they say, is history. So I finished my book. I picked my publishing route. I had my beta readers give me feedback. And then Brent can tell you I hold an award with his company, the most thorough editing by an author of anybody he's ever worked with.
Shocking, I know, Brent. And my lawyer friends on here, Jim and Rick, they're not surprised either.
It's probably one of those law review kids, probably one of those smart kids, wasn't he, Greg?
He was on the Vanderbilt Law Review and the Vanderbilt Blue Court team.
There you go. There goes the editing side.
He gets it honestly.
You just got to go through it. So we had our design editor. I had to apologize on revision 3 and 4. I am so sorry. I've got another round. And then, of course, Jim and Rick and Brent know that when you feel good about it, then you pull the trigger, and that's what led us here. So we're thrilled to have Deadly Division available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or it's in the chat. You can purchase it directly from www.nathaniel-sizemore.com. And a shout out to Mr. Preston Saunders. You may have seen him walking around. He's a social media guru, a website developer, and a photographer. So he's capturing some of these moments here, but he and his company, We the Creators, did a fantastic job with the website and all the social media graphics. are a direct result of Preston and his team. So thank you, Preston. And then finally, a shout out. I don't know if she's on the board. I spoke to her this morning. My publicist, I'm working with Kelly and Hall, based in Marblehead, Massachusetts. Jocelyn Kelly has a high degree of brand equity in the industry on the publicist side, and so thank her for her help as well.
Great. Nathaniel, let me ask you this question. What was your inspiration for this story, if you will? And how did you keep that inspiration alive all these many years? There was quite a gap between the start and obviously the continuation and the finish, as I've heard from several of you fellows. But what was the inspiration? Can you give us a little Cliff Note version of how you were inspired along the storyline, and maybe what was the purpose of really going ahead and completing the work? What inspired you to do that?
So I've always loved, like many lawyers who have a creative bug, I always have had a high degree of respect for folks like John Grisham, David Baldacci, who were practicing attorneys and then wrote novels. So I've always loved Grisham novels. I mean, who doesn't? Loved the movie versions. The Firm is one of my favorites. And I guess I would say the inspiration, the core of the book, I would encourage you to read the book, but the core of the book is really a clash between politics and religion. And that hasn't really died down in the last decade. So you talk about the ongoing inspiration. It was every time I turned on the news. Mm-hmm. It was this concept of political freedom and autonomy and what's best for the country, and then maybe infringing or sneaking in on some First Amendment rights. And then, of course, with the thriller element, there are some fun and dynamic characters, some nefarious characters, some characters you're not quite sure about whether you like them or you don't. And so I developed the story with that as kind of a driving tenet.
Great. So let me ask your three mentors and coaches, if I may. What have you learned in your journey? You're some miles ahead of Nathaniel in your experiences, being multi-published authors, if you will. What have you learned that you would share with Nathaniel or those of us listening since you began or since you published your first work? And while they're gathering their thoughts, if you're just joining us now, you can see on the screen there where to get a copy of Deadly Division. Nathaniel also directs you to his website at Nathaniel-Sizemore. Is that right, Nathaniel?
Nathaniel-Sizemore. That's right.
That's right. .com. And there's more information about Deadly Division. But back to the mentors and coaches, what have you learned since you began the journey that you would share with Nathaniel or the rest of us interested in embarking on a journey toward publication?
A great deal of humility. Nathaniel, you're going to be surprised at first off the number of people that come up to you. This is going to be the first time anybody's asked for your autograph. They're going to come up, they're going to bring you the book, they're going to ask for your autograph. They're going to come and talk to you about the book. What is going to be, I think, particularly interesting to you, I told you that my favorite book was Alligator Alley. And in the book, there's a scene where the main character wrestles an alligator. And I had somebody from Texas write me a letter about how beautiful of the battle that was and how well I captured the battle between nature and man and everything that was happening in the book between the Seminole Indian tribe and the people. It went on and on and on, and I didn't have the heart to write back and say, sometimes an alligator wrestling scene is just an alligator wrestling scene. But you'll find that people pick up stuff on your writing. Maybe it's subconscious, you put it down. Maybe you didn't even pick it up when they did it. People are going to find a line. They're going to find a paragraph. They're going to find a section of the book that really, really, really relates to them. And it's going to surprise you. You're going to sit back and you're going to go, oh, I didn't see that one coming. And the humility of somebody coming up and saying they like the book and saying, will you sign this for me? That is something that, you know, I go to a lot of book shows. I go to the American Library Association. I do BEA. I do all of them. You can always tell the people that write their own books and those that have ghostwriters, the celebrities that have ghostwriters, they're pains in the butts.
Yeah.
They're there because they're trying, but you can tell the people that slaved over the pages, that bled onto the paper their feelings, because they're so glad that somebody came up and said, can I have a copy? Would you autograph?
They're humbled
this
by
to me?"
it. Yeah.
It's a very humbling experience when people come up to you and say, I really dig what you wrote.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
That's going to be the cool part. And you're going to find that very soon. Somebody's going to come up and say that to you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Jim, what have you learned in the journey that you would toss back to Nathaniel in his process?
I think writing a book is half the battle. The other part is selling the book. And
yeah,
clearly, I mean, you want your book to be successful. So it's recognizing the target audience and then promoting the hell out of it.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's really how, you know, the big publishers work. They're just big promotion engine. But I know, you know, writing a book is tough. I mean, it can take a lot of time depending upon what you're writing. But then the other part is selling it. But once you get your target audience, and this is why, you know, just don't write one and you're done. Write multiple books. That's what publishers like. And I think that's what your audience likes too, because they want more and they will come back. After I was done with my first book, I got multiple emails and calls from people saying, when's the second one going to be done? When's the third one going to be done? But you get them hooked. And that's how you really can develop your role as an author and also be a success too. But I agree with Rick. It's really humbling, particularly when you have people come up to you and you have streams of people. When I go to Ohio at Christie's home, there's streams of people coming up in their cars to Christie's studio, and you know, easily 200 people in an afternoon just to buy a copy of my book, and it's humbling.
Thank you for that. And before we get to Brent, you'll see that Palmer has put a screenshot of Nathaniel's landing page there, Nathaniel-Sizemore.com, and that'll tell you more about him and how to connect and order the book, etc. Brent, what would you toss over to the fence to Nathaniel?
Well, first of all, I want to just congratulate Nathaniel. This is, I don't know if you realize how monumental this is. There's a lot of people that'll come up to me once they know I've, you know, written books and publishing books. They say, I've got a book, and I'll say, really, I would love to read it. And they go, well, it's right here. And they'll point to their head, and I'll say, you know what? I can't read it in there. You know, as much as I might try, I can't read it in your head. So, and they don't realize that. They think it's like this book that's just going to flow out onto the page and it'll be a great book. This is such hard work. It's hard work creating. It's hard work honing and editing. It's hard work. You have to kill a lot of your darlings, you know, that really beautiful paragraph that really doesn't quite fit. you have to get rid of those things or put them in for the next book, you know, put them in your little folder for the next book. So kudos. I mean, I want you to realize the monumental nature of this moment, because there's lots of people that want to write books, and there's lots of people that want to get them out and get them published. And there's lots of people that don't, because it's so hard. It's just monumentally hard. So I'm patting you on the back because I'm very proud that you've slogged through, you've done the work, you made it happen, and congratulations. That's the main thing I want to say is, you know, congratulations for making that happen. And the second thing is keep going.
Yes.
I mean, you have so much more to say and so much more to write. And as
He
hard
has
as
so
it-
many more paragraphs of yours to kill.
that's right. So many.
Trust
So-
me, he's a publisher. He has so many more paragraphs that he just wants to redline right through.
No, not me, not me. I'm very generous with my edits. I like to give the author as much leeway as I can possibly give them. But yeah, keep going, keep writing. Find your voice, find your method and how it works best to write. Everybody has a different method of how they write. And it's sort of like building a table. You built your first table and it's a pretty freaking awesome table. Guess what? The next table is going to be even better and it's going to be easier and you're going to build it faster. And then the next one's going to be even better. And so you have to go through that process. And as hard as it is, that's where you have to get if you want to just keep getting better and keep getting your voice out there. So I'd say keep going.
Thank you so much for that, Brent. If you're just joining us, we're talking to three terrific friends of Nathaniel's and mine, I might add. Rick Robinson, Jim Head, and Brent Darnell all have had a part in the successful launch of Deadly Division, and we appreciate their taking time to be on here. One of the questions texted to me was, can you give us a teaser about book number 2? You mentioned you were already starting book number 2. Can you give us a little bit of a teaser for book number 2?
See what you did, Brent? Do you see what you've done?
Yeah,
I will give you a teaser. You don't have to have read the first one to enjoy the second one, but it would
Good
help.
to know.
And I'll tell you this, in Deadly Division, there's the primary location, which is Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. A place is very close to my heart, with a secondary focus on the Charleston area in South Carolina. I'll tell you this, I'll leave you with this. The primary location in book number 2 is in the Charleston, South Carolina area. In fact, I have a ton of history and low country books on my nightstand to make sure that I get it right. So that's
You also have a participant this evening. I'm seeing John Gottschalk and his 2 beautiful girls there from Charleston, South Carolina. Interestingly enough, we met John Gottschalk when he was a kid. John was a beach bum. He was selling beach rentals on the beach. And Cindy and I, Nathaniel, got to know him and his family and his brother. And he's such a dear friend. And with those 2 beautiful babies, it's good to see you. So, John, you may even be a character in that book. More to come. Not so much now.
John's already gotten an email from me on a few local things, so he knows.
No,
Good.
I'm so excited. As soon as thank you for including me in this intimate setting. And I'm going to purchase this book right when I hang up. I have a tennis match in a few minutes, so I might have to leave early, but I am super excited to get my hands on a copy.
Thank you, John.
And
Appreciate that.
Nathaniel, I'm gonna get you to autograph it when I see you.
We'll see you at Christmas time, John.
Yeah, awesome. That'd be great.
We'll see you at Christmas time. So if you have any thanks, John. If you have any questions, again, I've got some texts and I see some in the chat, and those are all good. The other question I have, particularly for you, Jim Head, is what's next for you in the journey of introducing the world to Mr. Christie, and does it have an endpoint, or what is next after next for you, Jim?
Well, I finished my second book in 2019, and I'm working on the third in the trilogy. And so when that is done, I have a set of 3 books. And going back to what I mentioned earlier about promoting your book, the good thing about the Christie story is it's a true story.
Yeah.
And his works of art are in the U.S. Capitol. In fact, the largest painting in the U.S. Capitol is by Christie, in the Supreme Court, as well as the White House. So there's a lot of interest in D.C. With Christie, and New York and Ohio, because that's his birthplace. So the next step is to take that story and to create some sort of documentary, or what I would perceive as a movie, but more sort of along the vein of a Netflix 3-part series, to get his story really told in the form of a motion picture. Because this is a period from the 1870s to 1952, a colorful and transformative time in America, and he was there to capture it.
You've got my interest up in Mr. Christie now. I just, I had some curiosity when I would read your posts and such things, but now I'm truly intrigued. So,
well, you're from Ohio. His works are on the State House.
But you know what? One of the things you've been able to do, I recognize his works now just by your posts and your journey. I've begun to recognize when I see them at the State House or at the governor's residence, etc. So
yes,
that's quite fun as well.
And there's one behind me here.
I noticed that. Absolutely.
Original oil painting that was used to warn against the dangers of railroad crossings. It was from this, a poster was created in 1936.
Isn't that fascinating? Absolutely fascinating. What is the biggest impediment other than the hard work that it requires? And this is for all four of you, for you, Nathaniel, you, and of course, Brent and Rick and Jim. What do you think the greatest impediment to overcome is if some of us are considering doing something like you men have done? Rick?
Dedicating yourself to doing it, number one. First, you have to sit down and say, Brent, you are exactly right. How many people have walked up to you and said, well, I got an idea for a book. There used to be a time in America where there were so many publishers that they would say, okay, here's a check, go write it. That doesn't happen anymore, does it, Brent?
No.
You have to have a good, solid book going in to have a publisher look at it. The thing that I like about Nathaniel, and he just mentioned it on the second one, Greg, is he's talking about the research that he's doing on Charleston. Now, I think the one thing that will turn a reader off quicker than anything, I took my son to Thriller Fest one year, and this guy did a reading from one of his books. And from his book, he said, the man left the Roosevelt room, ran up the stairs to the Oval Office. Now, my son, who my fraternity brother is a Secret Service agent who had taken us to the White House many times, looked at me and said, Dad, isn't the Roosevelt room right next to the Oval Office?
Indeed it is.
And indeed it was. And there was, and my son was like, well, he's just he was wasn't even in college at the time. Like, that guy's just a fraud.
Oh no.
He said, I'd never read anything by him because, and the amount of time, I think what people don't realize when they go through this venture, and Nathaniel, I'm glad you're saying there's a stack of books on Charleston, because there is, if you get one little piece of the fact wrong, it will turn off somebody. And sometimes you may do 2 or 3 days worth of research for a paragraph. So your research on Charleston, Pat Conroy would be proud of the fact that you're researching his city and you're researching his town, and add to that list the introduction to South of Broad, and you'll have it all done.
That's a great book. In fact, I think I may have bought that for you, Nathaniel, last time we were down in Kiowa. Pat Conroy is just terrific. He just absorbs the reader from the first few paragraphs right into the story, and he's
it's funny. It's funny, Greg. I did not, when I actually ordered a copy from a bookstore where Pat Conroy was going to be signing copies. I got an autographed copy. I read the first 20 pages and I threw it across the room. And my wife looked at me, so she said, "What the hell was that about?" And I said, "I could work the rest of my life and never write 20 pages better than what I just read."
He was truly a gifted
It
author.
was that beautiful, that
Yeah.
well done, that well you know, and it was merely, Nathaniel, it was merely a kid delivering papers up and down the other side, one side and the other side of
Yeah.
Broad Street in
Yeah.
Charleston.
Been there many times.
It was his homage to the city. And he, you could tell that he knew the city so well when he was writing it. And again, I looked at my wife and I was like, I can never do that. I could never come up with what he did in 20 pages so brilliantly.
He is amazing. He is truly amazing. Thank you for that, Rick. If you're just joining us, and I know a few more folks did, we're talking about Deadly Division that launches today. Greg, who's doing production, if you can show that cover again and where they can purchase it, and perhaps Nathaniel's website. And we're also talking to three of the most influential people in Nathaniel's life when it came to his publishing journey. And you just heard from Rick Robinson. There's Jim Head, and of course, publisher and himself an author, Mr. Brent Darnell. Nathaniel, let's turn it back over to you. What else do we need to know about Deadly Division? Obviously, we can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and we can also get it on the Nathaniel-Sizemore.com website. But what else do we need to know about it? And perhaps you've got time to just tease us with a couple of pages of one of your chapters.
Yeah, so I get the question I get a lot is what was my writing process? And I had to think a little bit about this because, of course, when you get into it, you got to think back and say, what in the world did I do to come up with this content? But really, I had a pretty simple process that actually worked quite well for me. And that's when I had the basic idea, I knew that I needed a guide document. And so actually what I did was I sat down about 4 to 5 hours, I think it was on a Saturday afternoon or something, and I wrote 3 to 4 sentences for each chapter. This is what's going to happen in this chapter. This is the characters that the chapter is going to focus on. And I had I really like the Dan Brown model of having converging storylines where, 2 or 3 main characters and a couple supporting characters start in different spots and converge together at the end of the story. And so I knew I had to be a little bit more organized than just, hey, what should be next? So I wrote a basic storyboard. I think it was about 8 or 9 pages. And that had most of my chapter summaries already written. And I did that for the second book as well. Same sort of thing, about 4 or 5 hours on a Saturday. Because then I felt confident that I had a straw man outline of my story. And I felt confident that I knew, okay, I'm going up Mount Everest, but at least I know generally the direction that I'm going. And then as I got into the chapters, I was surprised to find myself going in different creative directions based on how I felt that the story and the chapter should unfold. So I would say that the story that is being published and the book that's published is probably only about 50 to 60% of my original story summary document. But that's the fun, and that's where I scratched the creative itch. Is I said, okay, here's what needs to happen in this chapter, and then I would just let my my creativity out onto the page. If it didn't work, I would polish it up, but that was my general process. And so a lot of folks have written me and asked me and texted me about that story process. How did you develop the book? How did you develop the story? And that's how I did it. Hey, Greg, I can't hear you if you're on the board. I can't hear you. Greg Palmer, can you switch us back to?
I've got it. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, but I can't see you. There we go.
There we go. We had a little snafu here with the internet. Share with us a few paragraphs of your choice. Not too long, but just a few paragraphs that give us an example of Deadly Division story. And while you're sharing those paragraphs, we'll put where to purchase up. And for your planning purposes, it is now 6:37. We've been on here about an hour or so, and we'll wind up about 6:45 or so. So just bear with us. Nathaniel, just a few paragraphs, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah, sure. And I like to start it out. I'm going to show you the first cover of my book. Something I love about Dan Brown books is he has fact in the beginning. These are items that the lens through which I guess you review the story. So I won't read them here because we won't get too deep into the story, but these are statements of truth and real things that really frame the narrative of the story. And I hope would leave people wondering, I wonder if this could really happen, or is this really happening? That's the fun part for me, is hearing that feedback. So what I'll do is I will read the first few paragraphs of the first chapter. Chapter 1. Dr. Francis Petrov's frail body hurried through the wide corridor of his red brick apartment complex. He knew he only had a few seconds to make it to his front door before the person casting the shadow behind him would overtake him. With his hands shaking uncontrollably, Dr. Petrov reached into his right pants pocket, desperately searching for his keys. At the age of 70, he was not accustomed to strenuous exercise, but now he was running for his life. His first floor apartment was just a few feet away when the owner of the shadow emerged from the darkness, grabbed the back of his neck, and with brutish strength, flung him to the ground. Dr. Petrov's head slammed into the gray cement floor with such force that a flash of white light flooded into his vision, followed by shapes and colors, finally yielding a hazy focus on the figure looming over him. As he lifted his head, he could feel blood dripping down from his long gray beard and into his from his long gray hair and into his goatee. He reached up and felt a deep stinging cut near his right temple. Dr. Petrov's attacker wore a neatly pressed black suit with a crisp white shirt and polished black Oxford shoes.
Sounds a lot like Jim Head.
That's good. Well,
Keep
Jim,
going. I'm sorry. Couldn't resist,
he's the bad
Jim.
guy, so I don't know if that's a compliment or not.
Couldn't resist, Jim.
He was athletically built with olive skin and was as fast as lightning. His dark hair was slicked back, allowing the light to bounce off his head in the dimly lit hallway. His gaze was unpleasant and his lips turned upward into a sinister smile. "It's over, Petrov," the man said calmly as he stood over his victim with his fist clenched at his side. Dr. Petrov realized any attempt to plead his case would be futile. This man was all business, and today his business was to take Dr. Petrov's life. He shot a glance at the front door of his apartment and then quickly looked down the hall toward two other apartment doors, praying one of his neighbors would hear his cries for help. The man followed Dr. Petrov's gaze. "Don't make a scene. They don't have to die," he said in a deep, monotone voice. The man made a quick downward movement, squatted, and looked Dr. Petrov in the eye. He was so close, Dr. Petrov could smell the cheap cologne on the man's neck and could feel the warmth of his putrid breath. "Please, please, I won't say a word. The senator's name will never..." Before he could finish his sentence, the man's right fist landed a punch to Dr. Petrov's left cheek. He could feel the left side of his face going numb as he fell over onto his right shoulder, which popped and crackled as it hit the cement floor. "Where do you want to do this?" The man seemed resolute on hurrying the process as he looked down the hall for the second time to ensure no one had heard the commotion and stumbled upon the scene. "Inside," Dr. Petrov whimpered. The reality was setting in that these were his final moments. His whimper turned into tears, and he buried his head in his hands as he laid on the floor of the musty hallway. Dr. Petrov knew his work was controversial, but he never anticipated it would end in his murder. He let out a deep breath, trying to calm and compose himself as he accepted his fate. Dr. Petrov hoped his work would live on, even if he did not. He knew his research would change the fabric of American life, and that's why so many powerful people were trying to bury it. The attacker stood up and grabbed the ring of keys which had fallen near the apartment's welcome mat. The man found the large bronze key which slid seamlessly into the lock on the apartment's front door. He pushed the door open with one swift thrust of his forearm. The dim fluorescent hall light floated across the dingy apartment's entryway, and cockroaches retreated into the darkness as the light cascaded in. "Let's go," the man barked as he tossed the keys into the apartment. "I've done all I can," Dr. Petrov confessed as he crawled on his hands and knees across the door's threshold. The man dismissed Dr. Petrov's comments with a stern directive. "Shut up and get inside." Irritated by Dr. Petrov's slow pace, the man grabbed him by the arm and dragged the old man into the dark. The door shut, and the last sound Dr. Petrov heard was the sound of the man's gun cocking back, ready to dispatch him from this world. Chapter
Well,
2.
well. Yes, that should tease tease you toward the next 70,000 words.
Thank you.
It's not a long read. It sounds exciting, and the initial reviews to your beta readers and others have been terrific. If you've joined us late, we've been talking to Nathaniel, of course, about his first publication, Deadly Division. He's also working on a second. And we've had a great time sharing with Jim Head, Brent Darnell, and Rick Robinson, three other published authors who have also influenced Nathaniel's work and coached him on the journey and on the process. Nathaniel, what do you want our listeners to do for you now? Obviously, they're here because they're interested in this book, and I think they will go out and purchase it. What can they do to help you promote the work?
Yeah, good question. So if you pick it up and you find it entertaining, thought-provoking, that's kind of the main goals. Tell some folks about it. The big thing you can do to help out is to share on social media that you've enjoyed the book, and then equally as important is Amazon reviews. So Brent Darnell has been on me for some time now about the importance of the Amazon reviews, especially for verified purchases if you purchase the book online. And so you can purchase the book at www.nathaniel-sizemore.com, and that'll direct you directly to Amazon. And you can purchase the book there. You can buy it in Kindle format or in paperback, and it should get to you within a week. If you like it, please leave a review. Those really help with prioritizing the book on Amazon's page. So that is my ask, and really, I hope you enjoy it. That's the biggest ask.
Terrific. Well, we want to thank you, Nathaniel, for taking the time to come share with us about this book. Obviously, you're among friends here, and we certainly wish you the very, very best for future success. We want to thank Jim Head, Brent Darnell, and Rick Robinson, especially, not only for their time tonight, but for their consistent their consistent work with Nathaniel and coaching him and helping him understand the pitfalls and watch outs this very arduous process. We want to thank you folks as well. You can see Aaron up there with Charlotte Grace and helping her support Dad. And we really, really appreciate you joining. We're going to, this session has been recorded. It will, once edited, it'll be on Nathaniel's website, and we will likely be sending you a copy or a link to the recording as well. My name's Greg Sizemore. We've produced this as a result of work from the Premier Association Group. I'd like to thank Greg Palmer, our production coordinator, for also being with us and helping us. And I understand John Gottschalk is the winner of the signed copy of Deadly Division. John went off to a tennis match earlier, but he will be the recipient of Deadly Division. And if you have additional comments or questions, Nathaniel-Sizemore or -Sizemore, as he says, .com, you can reach him and contact him directly. On behalf of Nathaniel and our other accomplished authors, we want to thank you very much for taking the time to join us tonight. You have a great rest of your evening, and good luck, Nathaniel, and what tomorrow brings. Take care and good night.